So really quickly, Chezni, why are you doing PC Legacy? To support Random Thoughts Entertainment in their effort to release games on Steam. Is PC Legacy going to be an ongoing thing? No, there are no plans to have an ongoing PC Legacy schedule. Well wait, then why even call it PC Legacy then? Why even put it on a playlist? Well, just in case I did reviews on other PC games in the future, I wanted to have a central place to put these videos. Any more questions? No! Then on to Diib's Dilemma! It's no secret that in the past I've only had good things to say about Random Thoughts Entertainment. I love their work, recorded Let's Plays of their games, and overall I thought that RE had their finger on what made games fun. However, nobody likes a biased review, so... Did you hear that? That was simultaneously the sound of both my fanboy goggles and my nostalgia goggles coming off. And this is the sound of my fanboy pants coming off. A sign that I will do my best to keep my feelings and personal bias in check for the rest of the review. From here on out, I'll be focusing on how this game holds up objectively by today's standards, and not swayed by my own love of RE. Okay, I can't read, and I'm getting a little cold, so I'm actually gonna put... hang on, I gotta go put something on. It's rather hard to put my finger on just what genre Diib's Dilemma falls into. You, the player, play as the apprentice who has a backstory and motivation for his actions which directly drive the plot of the game, as he finds himself fighting through hordes of monsters and becoming more powerful in a world with lore, magic spells, and a powerful demon boss at the end, which puts this game into the RPG genre. Except that you don't gain EXP, you don't have equipment, and there are no NPCs, and all the RPG actions take place on one screen through a series of levels that you fight your way through that become increasingly harder over time, and your skill is judged in the form of score, which makes Diib's Dilemma more like an arcade-style game. Or it would if it wasn't for the fact that it exhibits the signs of being a grid-based tactical board game. As you see, the game is played on an isometric grid called the board, whereupon it is not uncommon to refer to the player or enemies as pieces, and the game sometimes plays out in a chess-like manner with calculations being made dependent upon the number of spaces between the enemy and the player, as well as the particular squares that each spell takes effect over in various shapes. However, it can't entirely be a board game because, as you can see, the game takes place in real time, making it more akin to a real-time strategy game. So... Diib's Dilemma is a grid-based board game RPG presented to us in an arcade format. Wow. So if someone comes up to you and tries to sell you an RTGB BG RPG IAF game, tell them no. But it's not because this kind of game format inherently is bad. It's just because game developers who make this kind of a game are one of two kinds of people. Either they are completely unorganized and have no idea how to make an actual game, so they just throw in a menagerie of what they think a game should be and try and sell it to you, or they are one of those egotistical big-headed idiots who think that their game concept was presented down to them from the heavens in the hands of Jesus himself, and that their game will be the game to end all games, somehow encompassing every genre at once. Actually, I might have just described the same kind of person twice there, I'm not sure. But we all know what I'm talking about, right? We've all played them before, games that try to do too much. Maybe the RPG bits are fun, but the RTS portions are slow as hell, and you're stuck watching your boring little units crawl slowly across the map as you consider the kinds of sandwiches you could be making while waiting for something interesting to happen. Or maybe the story is really good, but the devs didn't know how to present it to the players, so they created a crappy, annoying arcade-style game that has nothing to do with the plot or setting whatsoever. You don't really want to play it, but you're forced to in order to find out what happens next in the storyline. Honestly, I think some of the best games created are ones that mix genres, but it's no easy task. The more genres you mix in, the more difficult the game is to make, from a balancing and smoothness of play perspective. In spite of that difficulty though, Random Thoughts was able to accomplish just that. A combination of all four previous mentioned genres into one game that overall is balanced and smooth to play. They did this by keeping everything in the game as simple as possible, which is the only realistic way to accomplish this kind of feat. Don't be fooled by Diib's simplicity though, the game is quite the challenge, even for seasoned veterans of the gaming community. Before we go too far down that road though, let's take a look at what the game looks like from the player's perspective. The game starts off with a young apprentice whom, after searching through the Dragon Mountains, finds the legendary necromancer Diib. The apprentice studies under Diib, but as is the case with most apprentices, he quickly becomes impatient with his progress and demands that Diib teaches him more powerful spells. At the apprentice's acceptance of Diib's challenge, Diib banishes the apprentice to Dilemma Tower, where the apprentice will learn the spells and magic that he seeks, but only if he survives. That's where you as the player come in, controlling the apprentice with his meager selection of spells and small number of hit points. I'll get into difficulty curves in a bit, but as a general rule, you control the apprentice through 100 levels of Dilemma Tower, which become increasingly more difficult the higher you go up. That's pretty standard to any game, but what about the spells? Well, that's probably the best part of the game, as there are a total of 40 potential spells available to you to choose from, and after level 61, you can choose them in any combination of 5 that you think is best. That may sound like a lot, but it's not. It's a lot. If you do the math, there are 102,400,000 different spell combinations. I think, if I did that right, that's 40 times 40 times 40 times 40 times 40. And yes, while not all of those combinations would be useful, the fact that you even have the potential to create them is staggering. Of course, you don't have access to them all at once though, as you must craft each spell individually with a combination of the 4 soul stones that are dropped by monsters or awarded while traveling up the tower. Players will gain a familiarity both with the monsters and the spells that they favor until the last 5 levels of the tower, where they face off against the demoness Flameshade, who apparently rules Dilemma Tower. Defeating her will finally grant the apprentice his freedom, which, oddly enough, takes him back to Diib's stronghold, which is now empty. With his newfound power and self-satisfaction of overcoming Diib's challenge, the apprentice takes Diib's stronghold as his own, likely to pursue his own goals of spells and sorcery. Overall, these little snippets of story are all Diib's Dilemma needs in order to give a decent setting and motivation for the game's story to take place. It's not horribly complicated or even necessarily original, but on the other hand, it's not contrived, asinine, or mundane. If there were more story or the story was more complicated, the game would just become bogged down. If there was less, the game would feel less contained, as if the activities of the game were meaningless or just happened in a void. While not necessary at all, if the player is the type to desire a little more lore or setting to the game, the monster's descriptions hint at other locations or places, like Mythica, which is presumably the name of the world the apprentice lives in, or the Clerics of Tears, which somehow got wiped out and turned into ghostly specters. It's subtlety like this that builds the world around Dilemma Tower without forcibly cramming it down the player's throats like so many other games mistakenly do. Now, hang on. A game that builds its world using descriptions instead of showing the player directly, or instead of having NPCs exposition dump information on the player. Now, where have I heard that before? But we'll get to that in a bit. For now, let's focus on difficulty. This game is so simple and yet so hard, which is really a great combination for games in general. You know how I said earlier that there are some 100 million odd spell combinations? Well, this isn't one of those games where you just pick whatever spell you think is the prettiest and just go with it. This is one of those games where if you aren't planning ahead, picking spells with a good strategy or plan, and executing them properly, you're going to find your win rate to be rather inconsistent. Yes, there is RNG in this game, and yes, sometimes it favors you to the point where you can have a crappy strategy and win with it. But let me put it this way. I've tried to find a game-breaking strategy out of the 100 million plus spell combinations, and the only combinations I've found are ones that just give me a good sporting chance at winning the game, and that's only if you get the right soul drops. When it comes right down to it, this game is pretty darn balanced with the realm of its own mechanics and rules overall. Yes, some spells or spell combinations will make your life much easier, but you generally never have to stop thinking entirely while playing the game. That's one merit that Diib has that earns it a gold star. Its difficulty and challenge are involved. You don't just get to win because you've put a certain amount of time into the game grinding, or just because you know a special secret that gets you the best weapon or something. You actually have to play the game. The biggest gatekeeper for this challenge rating, though, are levels 99 and 100. It's true, even in my no-death run of the game, I said that many strategies will take you up to level 99, but only a small handful even have a chance of taking you past that level, and fewer still will do so without liberal use of the save and load function of the game. More than once I've seen people complain that beating those levels are nearly impossible, and since levels 99 and 100 almost feel like half of the game to begin with, I'm going to share a bit of what I know about understanding them. You see, level 99 is the greater issue because you're dealing with 3 flame shades on this level, and as you know, flame shades cast undodgeable AoE magic, they heal themselves, they make themselves invincible, and they summon tons of creatures. Of the 40 spells in the game that we have available to combat this, sadly only a very select few are even usable on this stage. If you're a summoner, you might as well weep and give up, because summon spells are useless at this stage of the game. Flameshade constantly casts Storm, a spell that targets you and every one of your summons with indiscrimination. This means that Shifter, Decoy, Sprite, Undead, Ghost, Horde, and Spectre are off the table. The only summon spells that could be remotely useful in this situation is Hero, but because you have to wait 2 whole minutes before you can even cast the thing once, it might as well be useless, since the only way you're going to stand a chance at surviving that long is if you carry 4 power spells with you. Fire and Blaze are nice spells, but they require that you get close to the enemy to use them, making them unreliable and dangerous. Flame Jet, Fireball, Spark, Zap, and Bolt allow ranged attack, but either do too little damage or have too lengthy of a cooldown to be worth it, considering that they only target one monster at a time. Lightning theoretically could be used, but it relies too much on lining up targets, and once again, the long cooldown kind of makes it difficult to work with. Meteor doesn't deal very much damage and has a chance to harm the player, so it's no good either, and the same goes with Avenger. The trap spells Firewall, Blast, Thorn, and Spikes are all too unreliable and deal too little damage to be useful. Trap theoretically could be somewhat useful in this fight, but it's outclassed by Stasis. Stasis actually being one of the few S-tier spells that you have an option of using. Hole and Abyss are an interesting debate. They would instantly kill any of the monsters on the field that could get in your way. The problem is that they don't work on Flameshade. I'd say that makes them somewhat useful, with Abyss probably being the better of the two. The same goes with Curse, being that it instantly kills one opponent, but once again it doesn't work on Flameshade, and since you have to be right next to an opponent to use it, and the fact that the skeleton it summons after you kill the opponent almost always immediately dies, its usefulness is somewhat minor. Cure, Heal, Blood, and Life are all laughably outclassed, as the HP you would heal versus the cooldowns would never be worth it. Growth, on the other hand, is S tier, since it heals 60 HP per cast. Wealth and Avarice are useless in this fight unless you care about score, and if score really is what you care about, I've got a better method of obtaining it that I'll share later with you. Shield and Dispel are marginally useful here, with Dispel being the greater of the two due to Flameshade's Storm. The biggest problem with these two spells is that you're constantly being bombarded by both physical and magical attacks, so using one over the other exclusively still leaves you open to the attack of the other kind. I've never used Portal, but I would imagine that with its 5-second cooldown it could be useful at getting yourself out of sticky situations. However, since it could very well teleport you to a corner that is just as deadly as the square that you're escaping from, I would reason that its usefulness is theoretical and unreliable. Power, being that it is a spell that makes you invincible, can be hugely useful here, and while it is not the best strategy for winning, 4 power spells and 1 offensive spell can theoretically win you the level. Lastly, Storm and Nova will be your saving grace in this fight, as they are both spells that indiscriminately rain death down upon all creatures on the map, with Storm being superior as it possesses the higher DPS of the two. Okay, whew. So why did I make you sit through all of that? Well, just a moment ago I said that I was going to give this game a non-biased review, right? And up until this point I've mostly only had good things to say, right? Well, here's where the game might have missed the mark on a few fronts. Okay, so you have these S-tier spells, right? Specifically these 3 right here. Well, if you aren't using those 3 spells on level 99, there's an extremely high chance of you just straight up dying. In a game where you have so much freedom over spell choice, to be limited at the end of the game by the necessity of your ability to pass beyond level 99 because of spell choice is a little disappointing. As already stated, summoners are just screwed, which is really sad because if I had the choice, I would be a full-time summoner in this game. But Chezni, weren't you just praising the game's difficulty? Well, yes, I was. But a game can be difficult without being linear. Instead of having undodgeable attacks that the player must deal with on a constant basis, you could give the Flameshade special dodgeable attacks that only one could use at a time. Each dodgeable attack could be audiographed by a certain sound cue before each one was used, and they would all have a unique way of dodging them. It would put more of an intelligent choice burden on the player, in the sense that they must interact intelligently against the oncoming attack with the spells they have, rather than simply having a strategy prepared beforehand that would overcome the challenge in a linear fashion. Admittedly, this probably wouldn't solve the problem of summons being useless, but I believe it's a step in the right direction. Speaking of linearity, the monsters that you encounter that are immune to one type of spell over another are a mark against Diib. From a balancing standpoint, they are genius, as they force the player to take a variety of spells with them. Otherwise, if the player was like me, they would probably just go through the entire game with 5 storm spells exclusively. That being said though, from a player perspective, they are very unsatisfying. Essentially, they create binary spell checkpoints in the game, where the player immediately loses unless they had prior knowledge of the game because they didn't take the correct spell type with them. I'm not saying that the necessity of prior knowledge in a game is always a bad thing, but even in a game like Dark Souls, there aren't binary checks like this one when it comes to facing an opponent. I don't think it would be unreasonable for Diib to show the player what monsters they are going to face in the next level so that they could prepare accordingly. Otherwise, players just have to do what I did, which is keep an Excel file on hand that has the monsters you fight on each level. Speaking of Excel sheets, I have to share mine with you. Contained herein are all the stats that I've compiled from the game. All the information on spells, enemies, summons, and of course, the levels that I've gathered are right here. This is all useful information by all means, but what I really want to look at, and possibly what exposes one of the nerdiest things I've ever done in my life, is this chart right here. This chart displays the relative power that the player possesses at each level, compared with the relative danger that the player faces. The green lines are the player's spell slots, as indicated by the fact that they go up in increments of 1 every 20 levels, and stop at level 60. The orange bar is the player's HP, likewise going up until level 60. But if we can get rid of those bars and just look at these two, you can really see what's important. The blue bar represents the player's power, a number I came to by considering a combination of the guaranteed bonuses that the player acquires while climbing the tower, as well as the general rate at which random soulstones are obtained. The red line displays the danger the player faces. Again, I adjusted the ratings as best I could by comparing the difficulty of similar levels to the one that I was rating. If the level was harder than another level, I tried to give it a higher rating, and if it was easier, I gave it a lower rating. Now, as you can tell, the danger level has a linear trend that is ascending throughout the game, so you might think, mission accomplished, right? That's what a game is supposed to do. Well, the problem is, as well as the reason that RPGs are one of the hardest kinds of games to balance, is that it's not the difficulty of the opponents that you fight that is important, it is the power disparity between the player and the opponents. As you see early on, there are 2 points in the game where the difficulty spiked hard relative to the weak power of the player, both here and here. What this means is that every single level, aside from levels 99 and 100, are actually easier than these two sets of levels, and you encounter both of them before you even get halfway through the game. Difficulty curves need to be just that, a curve, and this is clearly not. Now, admittedly, some of these spikes are okay. They are dips because it is when the game throws a new monster at the player, whereupon you only ever fight one of them so that the player can learn what the monster is. That's actually perfect. But no matter what way you slice it, levels 41 through 89 are relatively the easiest part of the game, making the curve not very effective. By the way, as an aside, if any of you watching ever want this Excel file, I'm more than happy to send it to you. Just throw me an email address to send it to, and I'll get it to you as soon as I can. Anyway, I said I'd mention score, so here's my 2 cents on it. My initial impression of score is that it's more or less perfect. It rewards players with cumulative score combos depending on if they've used spells of the same element, as well as static bonuses depending on what types of spells they were using. That kind of scoring system is already better than most games I've played that have score, even arcade-style games. However, the wealth and avarice spells are a bit cheesy though. I think the theory behind allowing the players to sacrifice as many spell slots as they feel comfortable with in order to get more of a score is great, but the problem is that it encourages the player to kill every monster on the board except for one, and then run around the board casting wealth and avarice over and over again to increase their score. I mean, that just sounds tedious. I read online that eventually the spell will stop working and that it limits your score growth in that way, but I never had the patience to try and see what the limit is, or even if there was a limit, as it was reported to be somewhere around 40 casts. Frankly though, that kind of strategy pales in comparison to what I'm about to show you. Yeah, this. Do you see this? If you're going for score, you might as well not even beat level 99. Instead, just get to level 99, take 5 power spells with you, and time them out so there's no invulnerability downtime whatsoever. Using this method and a bit of patience, I was able to blow my no-death top score out of the water. And that was starting out the level with a score of 0, since I loaded a file into it. Ultimately, this makes me sad, because all those top scores I saw on Random Thoughts' website when I was a kid probably wasn't the efforts of some master-crafted plan, it was just some guy doing this. Enough negativity though. And well... Right, okay, so I keep comparing this game to Dark Souls, and it's about time I addressed that. Why on earth would I be comparing a 20-year-old Java-based game to Dark Souls? Well, it's because both of the games fill the same niche that a certain game audience out there desires. Both games are brutal. Both games punish mistakes heavily, and both games require prior knowledge of the game in order to beat certain enemies. See, games 20 years ago were kind of expected to be like this. They were expected to be unfair and challenging. Partly that was due to the hardware limitation, and partly that was due to if you wanted your game to be long whatsoever, you had to do something that prevented the players from immediately beating it, since they were kind of shorter games. Over time though, as larger audiences began to find gaming fun and technology improved, developers began to make games that were more accessible to more people in the hopes of selling more copies of their game. There's nothing inherently wrong about that. I'm happy that more people get to play games. But it did leave a niche of people who actually liked their games to be that difficult, with less of a selection of games to satisfy their challenge-desiring sweet tooth. Dark Souls harkened back to that age of unfair difficulty, of expected failure that we found in most games 20 or even 30 years ago. Diib's Dilemma fits in perfectly with that genre, so even though levels 99 and 100 see necessity of spell linearity, even though there are unworn binary spell check levels, and even though the score might be somewhat broken, it doesn't matter, because even today, the game still holds up to provide a fun and entertaining challenge that, best of all, never tries to hold your hand or tell you what to do while you're playing it. The game lets you fail, which is something that sometimes feels so hard to do nowadays in games. Fail. Wow, just think about that a moment. There are literally some games where failing is more of a challenge than succeeding. Oh great though, now I sound like some old hipster telling the kids to get off my game lawn. Yeah, back in my day, we actually had to play our games, and victory meant something. Alright, look. Not every game has to be difficult in order for it to be valid. Truth be told, I've played plenty of easy-to-win games because I just didn't want to try hard at something. But if you like difficult games though, do give Diib's Dilemma a try. You won't regret it, until you get to level 99. And hey, shameless plug, you can play Diib's Dilemma on Steam for $2, probably less if it's on sale, so what are you waiting for? Go support Random Thoughts. Oh, and for those who are interested in seeing my no death run, or a goofy quick little movie trailer that I did, I'll put the links at the end of the video, as well as in the comment section. Anyway, thanks for listening. This has been Chezni at PC Legacy, reminding you that if you're an apprentice of a powerful spellcaster, and you try and take power from him faster than you're capable of, you might not get off as easy as Mickey did with Yen Sid. Signing off.